So next up on our Chironomid series is Don's old school Chironomid. I've had a lot of people ask me if we still use peacock herl as the thorax, and yes, we do still use lots of peacock herl. This is one of those ingredients that is just so good to imitate the thorax on a fly. It's so lifelike. It's got the perfect iridescent colors. So we are going to tie an old school one. So this is what we're going to tie with. I'm actually going to use some 12-aught red wax thread, some Semperfli thread. We're going to use some pheasant tail for the thorax that I like to pull over. We're going to actually use the peacock herl for the thorax. We're going to use some white ostrich herl to imitate the gills. Now this white ostrich, again, very good for the gills. Really UV, stands out. Very nice stuff. For the body, I'm going to use a red thread again, and I'm going to color it with a Pantone pen, a red Pantone pen. And I'm also going to use some fine copper wire to rib. And these old school Chironomids we kept quite thin, so you'll see how we do this and create a real nice thin taper. So to start the fly off, just going to get our thread onto the hook, and everything's kind of tied in reverse order with these old school Chironomids. Now we're going to take about 4 or 5 strands of your pheasant tail. So I've just clipped it off. And then we're going to put it butt section back, so all the tips facing out, and just tie that in. This is going to create our wing case after we tie in our gills and our thorax. So I'll make sure that's on top. Next, we're going to take some white ostrich herl. And I've got I like to take the strands right off the very end, right off the very tip here. They're real long as you get further down, which is still good, but I prefer the ones near the tip. So I'm going to take that and again just tie it in and tie back just once over. Now take about, I like it between 3 and 4 wraps right by the eye. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to create some really nice gills in the fly. And cut off your excess. Now, before you tie in your peacock herl for thorax, wet your fingers and pull all that white ostrich forward. Because we don't want to tie over it. We want to make sure those gills really stand out and then wrap it forward a little bit. Okay, so now you got all those gills standing up front. Take one strand of your peacock herl, tie it in right behind where you put in the gills, wrap back, and then just wrap in a thorax. And I like to create about the size of a 7/64 inch bead. So right about there looks to be about the size of what a bead would be. That's kind of the ideal size for your thorax. And cut off your excess. So now we got some beautiful colors. We've got the nice white gills. We've got a great looking thorax. Now pull all your pheasant tail straight up so it separates out the gills. Push with your thumb and pull it over just to create the wing case. And then tie off behind. I'd only go down a little bit before I cut off my excess because that's just going to start creating a bit of a taper on the fly. So now we've got our white gills out the front. We've got a nice thorax built, a wing case, and now we can start building our body. So to create the body, we're going to take our copper wire. And again, I prefer the thin copper wire because I can keep it nice and small. And the copper does show up really nice on this fly with the red. So tie it in. And now I like to go down just towards the hook bend. I don't even like to get to the hook bend. Usually stop somewhere around there. Pull the wire forward a little bit and take, 3 or 4 wraps behind the wire and then in front. Pull the wire off the back, and then we're just going to start creating our body. Now I like to build up a little bit of thread prior before I start coloring it. So I'm just going to build it up, and not build it up huge because these old school Chironis were pretty thin. We kept them quite thin, and of course most Chironomids are pretty thin. So you can see I'm just building it up It's got a nice taper now. I'm going to finish about halfway up. Now, what I'm going to do is start coloring. A lot of people at this point will change the color of the thread. That's all right. You know what? You can finish off this thread and start coloring a new one, but I prefer going with just painting it with that Pantone pen. And all I'm going to do is continue just to color up my thread with the Pantone. You know, it's nice wax thread, so it colors very well. And just continue to wrap forward, and you'll see the color differentiation now. I've got real bright red at the back. It's actually going into a nice darker color at the front. And I'll color up a little bit more, and then I'll finish off with that same darker color. So I'm going to color up a good section this time, just to create a full taper on that fly, and right up towards the head end. So now I've got it quite dark. So we got nice bright red at the back, kind of dull red, and now really dark red up towards the head end. So now we're going to finish. Before we finish, I almost forgot putting on my wire. So now I'm going to take that copper wire and again take about 6 to 7 turns up. Just try to space them as even as you want. You don't have to count. They don't have to be perfectly spaced, but create just some nice ribs up the fly and finish right behind the thorax. And just little loops as you pull the wire, and it breaks right off. We've shown that numerous times. So now we're just going to finish at the head end. If I still got some color on there, but again, I'll make sure that it is a nice dark color before I put the whip finish on. A lot of people will actually take the Pantone pens and color them up too. That also works, whatever you prefer. So I'll take a few wraps right there just to finish off. And now you can see how nice and the nice profile. Very thin. Got one little straggler there. Cut off any stragglers. You got really nice gills sticking out and a real nice body. Now, a lot of times we finish the Chironomid like that. We left it very thin. We left it, we didn't finish the body. We really didn't have a lot of UV coatings back in the day when we were actually doing this way. We just would have, nail polish or anything else to finish them. But now that we have some UV coatings, I'm just going to combine a little bit of the old school with the new, and we're just going to UV coat this just because it lasts a lot longer, makes it a little more durable, and helps it sink. And the key with these old school patterns, I did a show with Brian, a Chironomid video many years ago, probably 15 to 20 years ago. And these were all the patterns we were using. We very rarely had beads on the patterns. They were all old school. They all had the peacock herl and the white ostrich herl gills. Really good for shallow water. When you want to fish a Chironomid naked, meaning you're not going to fish it with an indicator or a bung, as they call it in England, and other things. You just want to fish it on a full sink, or a dry line with a real long leader, 12, 15-foot leaders. These are ideal because they sink so slow. They've got that coating on them. The ostrich really keeps them up, and they sink very slowly. Really good for fishing in shallow water without an indicator. And look at those white gills glow. They just glow in the water. Ostrich herl just sets off the real nice color of the peacock herl thorax, and you get a great combination of old and new school with the UV coating along with the ostrich herl and the peacock herl. And sometimes you can even trim a little bit if you find your gills are a little long, but I like them long. When I see Chironomids emerging, they have really, really defined white gills. So there's an old school Chironomid. Hope everybody enjoyed it, and don't ignore the ostrich herl and peacock herl. It makes deadly Chironomids. To watch all our latest Sport Fishing on the Fly episodes and to order Sport Fishing on the Fly merchandise, head to www.sfotf.ca. And if you would like to book an adventure like this one shown, head to ontheflyadventures.ca and book yourself the trip of a lifetime.